Unlock the path to healing with Exposed podcast. Join us as therapists from around the world break mental health taboos, share powerful stories, and provide insights that transform lives. Tune in, educate, and thrive.
We can think of it as losing our parents is the death of our past. To lose our spouse is the death of our present, and to lose our child is the death of our future.
That's still a lot. Hello and welcome to Expose podcast. In today's episode, we have the pleasure of speaking with Valerie Smith. She is a remarkable therapist from Sugar Maple Consulting and Ecotherapy, exceptional clinical social worker, and as well, she has a certification in C-PTSD, EMDR, and other therapy specializations, and as well verified by Psychology Today, with a passion for supporting individuals through grief, depression, anxiety, trauma, relationship difficulties, adjusting to motherhood, and navigating significant life challenges. She creates entrusting and impactful connection with her clients. Her approach helps individuals understand the why behind their struggles, offering a judgment-free space to heal and grow. Please help me to welcome our guest, Valerie Smith. Thank you so much for coming.
And thank you so much for inviting me on. It's a pleasure to be here today. I've been looking forward to this and just being able to talk about the topic that I have for today, which is on young adults experiencing parent loss. This is a topic that has great significance to me, which I'll get into why in a second. And really, I just appreciate the opportunity to be able to do this. So thank you so much.
It's a pleasure, and I'm also want to celebrate you, as this is the first time, and I know from now on you will have so many possibilities and another podcast reaching to you and asking you to be a guest speaker at their podcast. But I want to celebrate your first time podcast. Woo!
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah.
Yes. One time podcast, the first time.
Yeah. So to everyone listening in, you might notice I'm a little bit nervous today. It's because I'm brand new to this, but you know what? I had to get my feet wet. So let's just jump in.
Let's just jump in. There is not many therapists who are willing to talk about the why they're doing the work of therapy and being a therapist and being a healer. But you are one of those who is open to share.
Yes.
Do you feel comfortable and safe to share on this show?
Yes, no problem. So you're correct. There are a lot of therapists who are quite reserved about sharing what brings them into the world of being a therapist. But it is one of those professions where, obviously people don't go there for the money or because they're told to do it. It's because something happened to them. It's very much a calling. And therapists tend to go into therapy because they're trying to make sense of whatever it is that happened to them so they can give back and make things better for other people. In my case, there's a lot of complexity to it. So I'm not going to bore everyone with all of the intricate details, but what I am comfortable sharing is that something that really empowered me to become a licensed clinical social worker and to build my own practice is that I was affected profoundly by losing both of my parents as a young adult. I lost my mother when I was 22 years old, and I lost my father when I was 34. Both of these deaths, stating the obvious, were extremely significant to me. And I think something that added into the complications of all of it is that my parents both died due to complications of addiction. My mother had cirrhosis and what's called hepatic encephalopathy as a result of many years of alcoholism. And my father had adenocarcinoma, which is a type of lung cancer from having smoked cigarettes for many, many years. I also had the unique experience of being their caregiver, making all the end of life decisions, overlooking all the finances, planning their funerals because they didn't have life insurance or any of those things. And, stating the obvious, that leaves an impact on you. So when all of this happened, I really was just trying to make sense of what I can do with this experience. I felt incredibly alone. I felt incredibly misunderstood. I tried joining some support groups for adults who lost a parent in general. And to tell you the truth, I felt like a fish out of water because while the information and the peer support overall was nice, most of my peers were way, way older than me, especially when I lost my mom. I would say probably the peer that was closest to me in age in that support group was still at least 20 years older than me. So I just felt like I couldn't relate. Anyways, uh, as a result, I ended up really using this as a gravitating force to have me pursue being a therapist. And I work almost exclusively with young adults who have lost a parent, as well as some other things, a lot of complex post-traumatic stress disorder and things like that. And I also created a one-of-a-kind group that's called Millennials in Mourning, which is literally what it sounds like. It's for young adults who have lost either one or both parents or some sort of parental figure. And instead of just touching on what makes parent loss so powerful, it goes deeper by exploring the topics that affect young adults as a result of that. So, for example, if you think about a milestone, when people are graduating from college, they tend to feel like, by default, their parents are going to be there. Or if they're getting married, they're thinking about how their parents are going to be involved, or, when they're buying their first house or having their first child or any of those things. These are things that culturally are just considered so commonplace and normal that we don't even have room to imagine the possibility that a parent isn't going to be there for that. So that's essentially the entire framework of the kind of work I do. And now throw questions at me.
Well, thank you for being open and sharing, the story of losing your mom at the age of 22 and your dad at the age of 32 and growing up in a toxic environment because no child should witness what you witness.
Thank
And
you.
um, and now looking what you're doing today, can you say again the name of that organization?
It is called Millennials in Mourning.
Yeah, we'll put the link below.
Yes.
Looking at what you're doing today, it's amazing. It is bringing a lot of hope, and thank you for all your work.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I am curious about how trauma and losing parents affects adolescent brain, emotions. If you could share with us a little bit picture so we can understand the another side of what.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. I think first, though, before I get into that, it's important if I just share a little bit on how parent loss affects someone in general, though, if
Yes.
that's okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. As you feel. Yes.
Yeah, sure.
You have the
Um,
bigger perspective, so that thank you for asking.
yeah. So the death of a parent is actually the most common type of bereavement in first world countries. I think that kind of goes without saying. And if we break it down to the United States, according to the 2021 census, it's nearly 27% of the population has lost both parents as far as being adult goes. 50% have lost their mother, and almost 70% have lost their father by the age of 50. For that, I don't mean the parent was 50, I mean the child was 50. Uh, any given year, that's nearly 5% or 12 million Americans are losing a parent. So this is an overwhelmingly common phenomenon. It's strange with that said that we don't really talk about it. And despite the commonality of losing a parent, there's no word to describe this loss. I mean, think about it. Orphan is a word saved exclusively for children, widow and widowers for a spouse, but there's nothing at all for an adult who lost a parent. And it's probably because it's so common that ironically, no one ever thought to make a word for it. There's also very limited research on how apparent death affects adult children. In all the research I've done in medical journals, the term death of a family member usually refers to the death of a spouse, then a child, rarely a parent, and almost never ever a sibling. I think I found even more research on the impact of pet loss than I did on parent loss.
So why is that? I know I'm interrupting you right now. We can talk about it later. Should I ask you again later about that?
No, you can ask me now.
Why is that there is no name for it, like even though it's so common? And
I don't know. My guess at best is just because it is such a common phenomenon and it's expected that we're going to outlive our parents, that it's just seen as why even bother giving a name to it.
Mhm. Lack of
That's
compassion, I would call it.
yeah.
Cultural lack of compassion.
Yeah. There are some mental health professionals who have an unofficial term for it. They call it the adult orphan syndrome, but it's quite a controversial title to use. Some people really encompass it and they get it and they think it's great. Other people say it's actually quite invalidating to, orphans who are children and adolescents. I know I've actually had that experience myself. In a Facebook group I was in with other social workers, I brought up that term, and another social worker said that's an incredibly invalidating term to use. And I was not trying to be invalidating, but I think it got down to they probably did not understand where I was coming from. And just again, that there is no word to describe this.
Mm, Yeah, it sounds like they weren't open to learn from you and ask more.
Yeah. I just ended up saying, like, look, I didn't coin it. It's from a book. That's that.
I like
Um,
when things have name because it really helps. I mean, it gives some feeling of I'm not alone. I'm not the only one. If this has a name, there's more people going through it. It feels some way connected, you know, in some way. I'm curious about your thoughts that actually the naming helps.
yes, I agree. There's something very, very empowering about giving a name to an experience. You're right, it does create a connection. Um, it's almost as trying to think of another example. I don't know if we talk about a mental health diagnosis, for instance, there's something empowering to some people about actually having a label to explain what's going on with them.
Yeah,
Uh,
I can give an example. Like
yes.
I had many therapists who decided to don't give me a diagnosis because that
Mhm.
was their, choice. But recently, I had somebody. I started a new type of therapy, and they mentioned what you've been through. It's a complex PTSD, and I was the first time a therapist said it, and I just remember that, like the good feeling in me, like, oh my God, it has a name. I finally nobody tells me I'm making it up, like my mom says, right? Like, just forget about it, this is past. No, it impacts me now, it has a meaning.
Yes, it does. And I'm glad that it gave you strength in having finally a name to your experience. Um, Not to get too off topic, but the reason why that diagnosis is so hard to get is because in the book we clinicians use called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, complex PTSD is not in there. Um, at the best thing we can call it would be post-traumatic stress disorder complicated type, or we could call it borderline personality disorder or a few other things, but that actual term complex post-traumatic stress disorder is not in there. I heard before, and I agree, that if social workers and mental health counselors were to be the ones to write the DSM, that would be in there, and most of the disorders would be taken out. The reason why it's not in there is because it's something that has to be treated very much by therapy, not so much by medication. And the DSM is written by psychiatrists. So there's a financial aspect there. It is, however, in the ICD though. So
Oh, thank you for mentioning that. Now I hope that others also get the idea. But let's go back to the how you know, about what we were talking before I got distracted. Everyone.
Fine. It's fine. So just a little bit on the lack of the name here. There is a writer, her name's Catherine Sanders, and she wrote a book called Grief the Morning After. And she said something along the lines of people very rarely inquire into the personal feelings of the bereaved or pay attention to their grief after a week or two, as if it does not require much attention or long-term reaction. As a result, adult orphan children must keep their feelings to themselves and mourn in secret. I think that adds to a lot of this too. There's people don't like to talk about death. And I think they are afraid that if they bring it up, they're opening up Pandora's box and it's going to make the bereaved feel more upset when that's actually not the case. All the research shows that overwhelmingly people who are going through death actually want to talk about it. It helps them process it. It helps them begin to feel like they can move forward and still live their lives in the absence of the person they lost. And it lets them know that they're loved and cared about. It's just no one wants to have that conversation. So it's unfortunate.
Yeah. And I feel like us talking about it, it breaks up the silence and brings up the awareness about that. What we try to avoid, it's even more persistent to come up with the feelings of trying to resist it.
Yes, most definitely. What I tell people, if they're not the person who's bereaved, but they're trying to support someone going through it, is that they don't even necessarily have to say anything. They can just say, you know what, I'm here to listen and I'm here to sit beside you. Because that at least there shows some respect and compassion and an opportunity to be heard. And I think that's beautiful and that's powerful in and of itself. Before I go into actually answering your question, though, there is just one more thing I want to say. I think really the importance of recognizing the adult orphan syndrome comes from Alexander Levy in his book that's called The Orphan Adult. And I'm just going to read the quote directly. He said, "Parents are the first and most prominent continuous certainty in our lives. We are aware of them before we become aware of anything else. We have gotten used to them before we even learn of life's other constants like the sun, the moon, or the ground." Then he goes on to say that the death of both parents causes us to realize we are no longer someone's child. It is the death of one's childhood. And I think that's important as a takeaway. So we can think of it this way. The death of our parents is essentially the death of our childhood, of our past. The death of our spouse is the death of our present. The death of our child is the death of our future.
Can you say it again? Because it's so powerful. I want to make sure we all get it because yes.
I said that the death of one's parents is the death of their childhood. It's the death of the connection back to their past, for the reason that whether they had a good relationship with their parents or not, those are the figures that were with them from the start. It's our complete sense of constancy. It's as eternal to us as the sun rising and setting every day. And because of that, it's not really until something happens to one of our parents, like they get into a serious accident or they get gravely ill or something, that we even really start to think about the idea of them dying. It's just kept in the back of our minds. That said, we can think of it as losing our parents is the death of our past. To lose our spouse is the death of our present, and to lose our child is the death of our future.
That's still a lot of to take, but people can watch the replay. I will create a short with this. I love it. This is so powerful.
It's a bit philosophical to reflect on. So
those are your words now. What you said right now, those are your words. And I'm very interested in this topic, but I don't want to make too many questions before you answer the ones which I already asked. But why is that? We can answer at the end. Why is that we can't talk about death culturally? I'm talking about the whole. I don't think there are specific cultures which can, but probably there are, as I'm not specialist on that. But where is that coming from? Is it? I have some, assumptions like we can, but I would like to hear yours because you are expert in this.
So my hypothesis is because we're becoming disconnected from death more and more every day. Much like we've become disconnected from birth, actually. Everything's become very medical model with it. What I mean by that is it used to be that, families lived closer together, things happened much more in the home, people died in the home, people gave birth in the home, families were involved in the embalming and the preparations and all that. And now that's all been industrialized. If you even think about it with hospice care, for instance, at best, the person will die in their home. But there are situations of where they still die in a facility. That happened to my own father. I had promised my father that he'd be able to pass away in my home. And unfortunately, in his final weeks, he developed what's called terminal delirium, and he became a danger to himself and to me. And for his own sake and his own safety, he had to go into a facility. But again, that's something that didn't really exist until somewhat recently. So I think it's just because of this distance we've created with it.
Thank you.
No problem.
And going back to the grieving when it comes to young adults and adolescents, you mentioned the ways how we can support them. Would you like to share some or spread some awareness around if grief or like losing your parent can actually impact your brain? If there is any research on that?
I would say so. To be honest with you, when I was preparing for this, I was going to talk more about change in roles and things like that. But yeah,
yes.
I can say quickly though, yes. Because a way you can think about it is that we do know that with neurobiology that our brains are not fully developed until around age 26. And before that, we have a reduction in gray matter. So I do think losing someone's parent at this age would definitely have some sort of neurological impact on them. But there is also something to be said about neuroplasticity too, and that we are incredibly capable of recovering ourselves too.
Thank you. Yes, that was enough understanding. And would you like to share a little more about what you prepare, what you just mentioned?
Sure. So just going back a little bit, I mentioned that, of course, parent loss is hard at any age. But because, I specialize in working with young adults who went through this, I just want to add that they go through some unique obstacles. As I said already, there's a lot of milestones that they end up missing out on. But also they have this phenomenon where they're essentially on the cusp of dependence versus independence. So while they're striving to depend on themselves, they may still turn to their parents for financial assistance, emotional support, the wisdom of lived experience, et cetera, et cetera. So to lose both parents in that forces them to have to essentially grow up right away. Even if it's just them losing one parent, that's going to cause a ripple effect too, of course. Say dad dies. All of a sudden, mom is left being like, I don't know what to do. You know what? He always did all the bills. He always did this. He always did that. I don't know what to do here. So it might end up being a thing of where the adult son or daughter has to take over these roles, which can create a lot of confusion and chaos in and of itself. And it can be incredibly frustrating for both people. But also they can feel very misunderstood in their pain. Trying to think of how to put this nicely, but for instance, friends or roommates may not understand, and there can be resentments that happen. I don't know, for instance, let's say the young adults in college. they're mourning because their parent died. And a friend is trying to be supportive, but they just don't know what to say. They say something like, oh, I get it. My grandpa died. No, they don't get it because it's normal as a young adult to lose your grandparent. Or they may say something like, oh, yeah, I know, I feel you, and that's really hard. Oh, by the way, and then they end up talking about like an argument they got in with their boyfriend or that they did bad on a test or something. And obviously, that's frustrating in and of itself because for them, that pain is very, very real. But pain is also subjective. So if someone is grieving, they could think of it as like, wow, you truly do not understand the level of pain I'm going through. So it's just hard here. Um, Another thing that can happen too is it can make young adults question their own mortality. They can think, let's see, mom died at 47. Wow, am I going to die at 47? It can cause them to behave quite differently. They can end up becoming a lot more phobic as a result. They can end up essentially having some sort of countdown. Or another way there can be a change too is like, I don't know, say they want to be a mother. They can end up thinking something like, I want to be a mother, but my child isn't going to have a grandmother or a grandfather. So there's just a lot that they have to think about and process there.
Could,
But, hmm,
could it
but
be
some,
actually a self-fulfilling prophecy?
yes, yes, very much so, I'd say. Um, but I do also think that there can be some positives in all of this. You know, it can make someone more empathic. It can make them grow up essentially and realize they have to be more mature and take responsibility. And it can also shift them into the right gear to get their lives together. Um, I think back on this with myself, and I moved out at 19, but I didn't really feel grown up. Uh, had my fair share of jobs and actual really relevant jobs in my 20s. I didn't really grow up. It was taking losing both of my parents for me to really grow up. Even me getting married, I didn't feel like I grew up. But once my dad died, I realized, you know what? At this point, I really can only truly solidly rely on myself. So I jumped really much deeper into my career. Um, my husband and I bought a house, and we got on trying to have a child. And 9 months after my dad passing away, I was pregnant. And to tell you the truth, I don't know if I would be where I am right now if it was not for that. Maybe I'd still just be thinking about it. I have no idea. What I do know is that, though, is that that safety net was taken out from me.
Mm, I was so tender, all what you shared right now, and so real.
Thank you.
Thank you for being so open, because it allows others to see that we are all humans going through transitions, and it's not easier for a therapist to go through it. Might be even harder because you have so many expectations from others and yourself to perform.
We Yes and no. You're correct about that, but I do think it would be good for fellow therapists to be more vulnerable and to be more human. Because I
Mhm.
think a lot of times it's forgotten in this that, yeah, we go through things too. And I think that can actually create this element of understanding that goes way, way deeper than anything we learned in graduate school. And I think that can benefit clients, them knowing that they're not alone in their pain, they're not crazy. And yeah.
Mm. Yeah, we want to live in that perfect world, and we give there are some labels like around some jobs we are
Yes.
conditioned to believe, and then the lives shows that it's so many different realities, and hopefully we're going towards a new dimension reality where we get to see the human before we see the accomplishments. their race and culture. We see the
I
here.
hope so.
Mm. And
I'm sorry, I cut you off.
I finished.
Okay. I was saying, in the therapy world, it is starting to change, luckily, which is why there is more and more younger clinicians who are more willing to be open about their lived experience. It was an old school belief that we can't talk about things for a very long time, but it's being challenged now.
Motherhood. Let's talk about motherhood. Could you share some of challenges which mothers can have as they are navigating this new role of having something in their belly and just the whole process of giving a birth and then looking at your baby and how to maintain sanity in all of that and having your own boundaries, and as the life brings you many challenges.
So I would say first and foremost, support is essential. And if it's not by the partner, it needs to at least be by someone very dependable, whether that be a close friend or a family member or someone of that sort. Um, you know, I was just talking about how grief can be a very isolating experience, but actually so can pregnancy and postpartum. It's a time that's supposed to be seen with great joy, but it can be extremely challenging in and of itself. It's a major transition. All of a sudden you're looking down at this little thing that's like 7, 8 pounds, and you're realizing, wow, this is completely 100% dependent on me. Every single thing. All of a sudden my life is completely about keeping this baby alive. And that's scary. And it's overwhelming. But really, the support is so important, especially during pregnancy and in the very earliest weeks postpartum. A lot of reasons for that is, we talk a lot about postpartum depression, and that is truly hormonal, uh, and it causes an actual change in brain chemistry temporarily. What it does is our prefrontal cortex is essentially what makes us human. It's our place of higher consciousness and all of that. And the prefrontal cortex actually essentially, quote unquote, shuts down during postpartum. And our more primitive parts of our brain take over. The reason for that is because, and this is again just theorized, but some researchers think it's to make it so we focus only on taking care of our baby. And that makes sense. The problem with it, though, is that it can make it where we do not feel like ourselves, and it can feel very, very turbulent. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. So what do you do when hate your own baby, when you feel like you don't want that baby? Like that's what happens in the postpartum depression. I had a friend who just was like, I just, they didn't let me, that's what she said, they didn't let me to be alone with the baby.
Who didn't let them? I don't follow. Who didn't allow them?
The family, because the person was just dangerous towards, themselves. Like that's what happens when you have postpartum depression. At least in her case, she just was having thoughts about doing something to the baby, like being violent.
Oh, I follow. Well, obviously that's a safety issue. So at that point, that's really having the vulnerability and the courage to reach out for help, contacting someone's gynecologist immediately and letting them know. It does not mean that the baby's going to be taken away or anything. I think a lot of people have this fear that Child Protective Services is going to get involved. And no, it's Child Protective Services, when they do get involved, really aim first and foremost to provide resources to the parents so they can stay with their child. It's not their intention to take a child away. But that conversation definitely starts first with someone's doctor. I would say also with someone's partner too. And again, I have to go back to the importance of support there. A lot of times when moms are going through this, it's their way of saying, I feel extremely unsupported. I'm sleep deprived. I'm so sleep deprived that I'm hallucinating. I'm not feeding myself. I'm not even getting the opportunity to go pee by myself because every single second my baby is screaming. I need help here. So in all of that, it's critically important for people to come together and make sure that that mom can at least get some rest. That will help. And for her to know that she's not alone, there are resources available. She will get through it, and not to be afraid to speak up about it. Also, antidepressants can help a lot too, especially Zoloft.
So it is some brain imbalance. That's what.
Yes, yes. Because if you think about it, it's really the biggest bodily shift we go through. You know, like you get pregnant, the body itself gets completely rewired. Then all of a sudden, baby's out, body has to go back to normal. That is a lot of work.
And how long can take to heal from that?
It depends on the person.
Mhm.
It can take over a year. But I would say generally, though, it starts to get better. I don't know, in my experience with working with clients, I would say a few months. It's it's the fourth trimester, the first 12 weeks that tend to be the very, very hardest for mothers. It's because of that hormone change. It's because of the major life transitions. And it's also just because having a newborn is incredibly difficult. Um, and I don't think people really realize that until they go through it. It's, I myself had postpartum depression.
You
I
had.
did.
Mhm.
Yes, I had it. Um,
Thank you for sharing.
yeah, no problem. I don't know why I thought it would be easy. I guess I figured, they're newborn, all they do is sleep anyway, but no, there's a lot of screaming, there's a lot of crying, and there's a lot of this back and forth like dance of just trying to figure out what it is the baby wants and needs.
Mhm.
And they don't really have the cognitive capacity yet to be able to express what they need. Um, I always loved my son. I wanted a baby so, so much. But I would be a liar if I said I enjoyed the newborn phase. I really didn't. I loved my son, I would say, out of obligation and biology, but I don't think I truly, truly started to feel a warm, loving, beautiful bond with him until probably 3 months old. Like when I started to really understand his cues, when I started to have some faith in myself as a mother, when I stopped taking all this unsolicited advice from people, and when I stopped letting myself feel so damn guilty. I think that's when it helped.
Guilty of what, if I can ask?
Just it's just how depression works. It just makes people just feel guilty. Like I don't want to get too off topic, but my son had a lot of feeding issues at first. You'd never be able to tell now. He's 99th percentile and high 99th, 97th percentile in weight. He's a big, big boy. But initially, though, he was pretty underweight and he had a lot of difficulty with latching and everything, and pumping wasn't working out for me and stuff. And I truly felt like I was failing
Mm-hmm.
at like a mammalian level because I thought, wow, the most basic thing I need to do for my child, which is simply to keep him alive, I'm not able to do. I'm supposed to be able to nourish him with my milk, and it's not working. I felt terrible.
Wow.
Then, eventually I was like, you know what? This is affecting my relationship with him. I need to get over it. I put him on formula, and I didn't look back, and he did fine. So,
Mm. There's so
yeah,
many expectations for women to perform when it comes to motherhood. It's like this expectation you're supposed to know it. And
yeah,
you're supposed to, just naturally know it.
yeah.
But there is no village. Like we are not living anymore in that culture where the village was there. It takes
That's
a village to raise a child, and now we have a mom who is facing so many transitions. Not just, I'm not talking about the baby, I'm talking transitions, body change. I don't have a baby. I was once pregnant, but I had to do abortion because it was a result of sexual abuse, but you know, it changes you. And now I got disassociated because I mentioned it. My brain is like triggered a little with this. But we have so many expectation to women.
We do.
And so how can we change it? How can we make women to feel like, I don't know how to say it even, like that all of that is welcome. And how can we create a better environment for women? So maybe even prevent. Is there a way to actually prevent postpartum depression by helping women in those 9 months before to manage better? Or what's your thought?
Again, definitely the support, and also women recognizing that we all have different experiences, but all of our stories are valid, all of our emotions are valid. I think something that really hurt me a lot, ironically, was that I was in a lot of mom groups on Facebook. Some of them were great, very, very loving, compassionate mothers. A lot of them, too, honestly, the mothers were extremely judgmental. And especially when I was having the feeding issues, because they just kept saying, if you just did it this way, this would work. If you did it this way, this would work. You're failing, you're failing. Do not even consider formula. I felt awful. You know, when you are trying to breastfeed for literally over 10 hours a day and the baby's not latching, and then you're pumping over and over, it affects you. So I would say definitely we as women need to be kinder to each other, and we need to drop the judgments, because our experiences do not paint the entire scene.
Mhm.
And people also just have the right to be able to do things differently if they want to also.
Yeah. Yes. I hope the world hears us. Another woman can put in the comments your challenge if they're ready for it.
Yeah.
Of just supporting and it all has its roots because our grandmothers were living in that world where those thoughts will help them to survive. But as
Yes.
we are no longer in those wars, we can drop those.
Yes, we can.
Hey, I would like to talk about ecotherapy.
Oh, sure.
If you could, as we're getting to the end, and it intrigued me personally, if you could explain to our audience what's ecotherapy and how it can benefit your clients.
Sure, and I love this topic, and this is something that's going to end this all on a bright note, because I know the topics we're talking about were actually quite depressing. So
It wasn't planned. Well, it was.
no, it's the nature of what I was talking about. So ecotherapy is like an emerging form of different therapies in the mental health treatment world. There's many, many different types, but really all of them are just therapy that pertains to being outside or about being outside. There's wilderness therapy, for instance, which is where a lot of people do a lot of activities outside that really challenge them. There is a therapy called EGALA, which I cannot remember what the acronym stands for, but it's a type of equine assisted therapy, but instead of riding the horse, you're actually working with the horse, and the whole point of it is to develop an understanding and more compassion and empathy. And really, what's beautiful about it is that I cannot remember the name of the organ, but horses have a sensory organ that lets them literally smell fear. So the horse is going to react to you if you're showing fear. Uh, for the purpose of what I do, though, I do what is called forest therapy, which is taken from what's called Shinrin-yoku, which is Japanese literally for forest bath. Um, Forest bathing, I'll explain first, and then I'll get into forest therapy. So forest bathing is a Japanese concept where there's a lot of belief that humans have a lot of health benefits from being outside in nature, especially in green spaces. And this is true. There's a lot of research out of Tokyo University that supports this. They've found that trees give off this chemical called phytonicids, And this chemical truly makes us feel better. It helps decrease stress. It increases serotonin uptake. It even increases the production of natural killer cells, which are the cells that help prevent cancer. So being outside literally makes us feel better. There's a whole lot of benefits to it. Forest therapy, though, takes it a little bit further than that. So, in addition to just being about how nature benefits our health, it's about us having reciprocity with nature, how we in turn can give back. So, forest therapy is this slow series of invitations or meditations, for lack of a better word, that I do with people that are out in the woods. And it could be something like an invitation on textures or sounds or the weather. I kind of just make it up on a whim. But the whole point of it is to help people feel like they are truly experiencing nature for what it is without judgment, and then in turn, giving back. In forest therapy, we always give back to nature by having a tea ceremony at the end, where the tea is made out of different herbs and things that are from the woods. And we pour the first respective cup to the earth, pour it on, say what we're grateful for in our experience with each other and with the earth that day. And then we continue forward. Um, it's, I don't want to call it a walk, because when people walk, they're being kind of mindless. They're just walking. And it's not a hike, because when people hike, they're not really paying attention to the present. They're not really paying attention to like the forest understory or something like that. They're just thinking about, I have to get to my destination. I would call this more so meditating while being on a saunter. You can do it very, very slow, and you're just experiencing everything coming at you. Um, Some people have told me it's the first time that they ever truly experienced nature that way, where they really picked up on every single sight and sound.
It's the first time I ever heard about it, and I'm going actually to re-listen to it after I edit this episode and even find a way to try it.
It sounds great. It can be done remotely too.
Oh wow.
Yes.
Are you
Yes.
are you doing it?
Yes, I do it remotely.
Oh wow.
I would say it's not exactly equivalent to really going outside and doing it, but I do offer it remotely. And the reason for that is that was actually something that came up during COVID. I didn't come up with the idea. I wish I did. No, it was that there were some other forced therapy guides that did, and they wanted to be able to do a way to still be able to work with people when no one could be around each other. So when I do it remotely, it's either that the person is just out in their yard or whatever, and they're following along to me, or they could even be like in their own house, but I'm outside and they're looking at what I'm looking at.
We're going to put a link to your website so people can schedule and experience it.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that.
We went deep and we talked so much about not only grief and trauma and loss of a parent and the adult orphaned syndrome. That's the name you invented.
No, I didn't invent it. Sorry. It's a term I use. It was invented, I believe, by author Alexander Levy, just so you know. Sorry, I didn't clarify that.
I think he wouldn't mind. Well, he's not alive anymore.
That's fair.
But thank you for being honest. Appreciate that. It was a pleasure to have you on the show and talk so deep about not only grief. I feel like, okay, this is dark and sad, but if we don't start a conversation like this, things are not going to change. Like, this is important to talk about, not only the beautiful, but the ugly too. Um, what's next in your life?
Next to my life? Uh,
Next in your life, like would you like to share your plans, your visions, um, in your career, or
um, yeah, I mean, I just, I want to continue to grow sugar maple counseling. Next in my life is I would eventually like to be able to have an actual office space for people to come to. So how my practice is right now is that it's all virtual except for the ecotherapy. That's done outside, but I can do it virtually with people if they want to. I am very blessed that I live in the beautiful Hudson Valley in New York, so there's hiking trails everywhere. It makes doing ecotherapy very easy. But yeah, I mean, I eventually would like to be able to have an actual office space for people to be able to come to as well, and I'd still continue to do the telehealth as well. And otherwise, just my own life, continuing to enjoy, watching my son grow up and everything. He's my world,
Mm,
and he's so smart.
I wonder why he's so smart. I wonder who is his mother.
Yeah, no, he's a cutie. He's a cutie. He's 13 months. And right now he has just been working so hard on his gross motor skills and he's trying so hard to communicate. And I'm just like, come on, you got this. He's adorable.
Mm. Thank you for sharing all the parts of your life, at least some very important. It was such a pleasure to have you, and congratulations on thriving after all what you've been through, and proving that thriving and success based on your own values and norms is possible, because you are the proof of that. You are, and I hope you can see it. And I know you. Well, I cannot say I hope you can see it. It sounds weird, right? How does it sound?
I see it as a compliment
Mm-hmm.
and it comes from a place of tenderness. So thank you.
Mm. Thank you. And Valerie Smith, ladies and gentlemen, Valerie Smith, make sure to check the links below this interview, connect with Valeria, and schedule your own ecosystem session. Is that correct? Ecotherapy session.
Yes, yes,
Thank you, everyone, and see you in the next episode.
yes. And thank you for everything today and for inviting me on.
It was a huge class, and I learned so much. So my pleasure. I hope you enjoyed this interview, and please subscribe my YouTube channel. For you, it's a one click. For me, it means the possibility to continue creating impact in the world with those videos. Thank you, and see you soon. Bye.